This whip crushed my spirits a little bit this week. I wasn't actually excited. I was nervous. So I was just like, okay, I have the time right now to sit down and do this. Let's just do it. And I did. And then I was like, I'm doing it. Look at me go. And then this progressed very quickly into I did it, but I didn't do it properly.
I'm Nora, and this is also known as
Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Noraknits. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me for another podcast episode. Today, I have a couple of whips to talk to you about, a finished object finally, and we're definitely going to be discussing a roadblock that I hit this week with one of my projects. So, if you are eager to hear a little bit more, then definitely keep on watching. And I think that we should just go ahead and dive on in. So what I am currently wearing is my very first finished object of Stash Bust Spring. So this is a sweater that I had knit in my own knit along that I've been hosting, where I am encouraging you guys and myself to use stash yarn to get some projects done. And I could not be more thrilled with this first finished object of the knit along. So long, Ozzy. She's like, I don't want to hear this. So this is the very hyped stripe hype sweater by Veronica Lindberg. I have been working on this, so from cast on to blacked and on my body, it's been a total of 31 days. So a very quick knit, I would say, for, a nice oversized garment. And let me just quickly run you through the stats. And then I have a few things that I would maybe change for next time or things to warn you about. But the spoiler here is not a spoiler if you've been here for any amount of time lately, that I absolutely loved working on it. I absolutely love the finished object of it. And there's just a few little things that I would maybe bear in mind for the next time I knit it, or if you're interested in knitting this, things that I would maybe keep in mind then too. But overall, obsessed still. 100% I will be making more of these. So to begin, I did knit this in the size extra large, and I knit on the recommended needles of the 4mm for the full body of this sweater. Now, the pattern calls for a DK weight yarn, and I was working from stash and actually was working with a few different weights, and even more so just like variations in weight. So the main color that I have used here is Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool in the colorway Oatmeal. So that's a 100% wool yarn, and I believe it claims to be a worsted weight. I definitely do think it's a nice light worsted, so it kind of borders on that DK. Then in order of appearance on this sweater, we have the scarlet red rusty color, and that is Nature Spun. I'm not sure what the colorway is for the Nature Spun yarn. That was a thrifted yarn. Then we have the charcoal gray stripes that you see. That was some leftover Cascade 220 in the colorway Jet. The Nature Spun yarns are a sport weight, and they're very fine. And then the Cascade 220 is a very true worsted weight. I would say it's a little more plump than the Fisherman's Wool. And then the rest of the stripes that you see are all various Nature Spun, so also that sport weight yarn. Now, the only difference is that in each of the Nature Spun colors that you see, with the exception of the green, I held the yarn single. However, for the green stripes, I decided to hold it double. And in the end, everywhere I held the Nature Spun single, it blocked out to a very similar gauge. You could definitely tell that it's just a little bit Like the row gauge is slightly different, but overall very similar. However, it's way more drapey and kind of sheer in those Nature Spun single sections. And then in the Nature Spun double, so the green stripes, the gauge actually matches pretty well with the fisherman's wool. However, sort of opposite, it is super dense and a little even stiff compared to the fisherman's wool, which has a little bit more drape to it. I think because of where it sits on the arm, it's really not a problem at all because it doesn't actually have to drape, where it is. It's always going to just be living on that spot. So a great place to have I wanted to eat up more yarn. Then the Cascade 220, I actually think is a pretty fair match with the fisherman's wool. So if you are knitting up this sweater or anything else, I do think that the Cascade 220 and the fisherman's wool can be pretty comparable when held up against each other. And then the only difference here is that the Cascade 220 is the only superwash yarn in this whole thing. Otherwise, it's all 100% non-superwash wool. So that's the rundown on the yarn. I'll get into costs in just a second, but I wanted to give a quick overview of how this garment is knit and then my sort of pros and cons. So you start this sweater, and the reason I loved this so much and knitting this so much and why I feel like it just needs to go on your queue no matter who you are is the way that it starts. So typically with a drop shoulder sweater, you're starting with either short rows or that sort of increasing trapezoid panel across the back. And this just starts out with a rectangle, nothing fancy. You just knit a giant rectangle. The whole thing is constructed out of rectangles, which makes this incredibly beginner friendly, but then also just so user friendly. So I call it hit the ground running knitting. If you are, I don't know, you suddenly discovered that you're going on a trip tomorrow and you just want something that you can grab and go and you won't have to be following a pattern in the car or something, this is the pattern. So you cast on the back shoulder line in just a rectangle and you knit down the back panel to the underarm. Then you cast on, did you cast on? Pickup stitches. So once you've knit that back panel down to the depth of the underarm, you pick up each shoulder seam on its own and knit with increases until you're at this bottom of the neck. So you do that for one shoulder, then the other, then it connects and work your way down to the underarm again. So both the back and the front panel are in the same place, at which point you connect to join in the round and you knit the body down, and then the sleeves get picked up from the shoulder seam and those are knit in the round down. The modification that I made to mine is that the body is supposed to have decreases and then it's supposed to have a more cinched in waistbands on the hem. Whereas I really did want a big, oversized, boxy sweater. That was what I wanted. So I excluded the decreases and then also added a split hem so that the hem would not cinch in at all. And I wound up knitting my front hem to about 3 inches and then the back hem closer to 5 inches. I also added a pop of color like you see on the collar and the cuffs. I added that to the bottom hem where that's not in the pattern, but I figured I could use up a little bit more of the charcoal gray by doing that, so I did. And then I followed the pattern for the sleeves, which decreased just slightly so that they're actually a really nice sort of taper without getting any balloon cuff or anything like that. And they're also, of course, just not snug by any means. And then that nice sort of 3-inch twisted rib cuff there too. And then the last thing that you're instructed to do is pick up the collar, twisted rib, pop of color, and all of the finishes got an Italian sewn bind off. So that's the construction. I definitely think it was very straightforward. The pattern was written incredibly simply and clearly, makes me want to knit another one of Veronica Lindbergh's patterns. And as far as the finishes and just everything that I followed in the pattern, I thought worked out really well. So the couple of things that I wanted to touch on were, first of all, I'm super happy with the neckline on this. I know that other people who have knit the stripe pipe had said that their collar wound up being too tight. I did not have that issue at all. However, the pattern recommends using a 3mm needle for all of the twisted rib, and I use a 3.5. So maybe that's why, but that wound up being actually, I think, the perfect sort of loose collar where it's not choking me, but it's also not scooping down. It's a really nice crew neck depth and super easy to get on over my head. So the only real issue that I have, and I mentioned it actually as I had done it in the actual knitting of this, is the sleeve pickup. Now, it's important to note that I am knitting this, I'm pretty sure off gauge. I haven't checked the gauge yet, but I never did a gauge swatch. And because I'm using a chunkier yarn, I imagine that my extra large is a bit bigger than the extra large sizing stated in the pattern. But also, I'm guessing it's mostly because of my row gauge issues with the Nature Spun. My sleeve pickups wound up being a little bit wonky, where I feel like I was trying to, well, no, it's even like the opposite way. I followed the amount of stitches that I was told to pick up for the sleeves in the pattern, but I felt like I could have picked up more stitches and had a cleaner transition. And this sleeve is actually the one that turned out better. But even still, you can kind of see where it wants to sort of like pucker here. And it's because the stitches from the circumference of the sleeve, the rate at which I was told to pick them up, I felt like it was really cinching in the armhole. So I think to mitigate that, a couple of options. One, size up in the sleeve pickup rate. But then, of course, you're going to wind up with a bigger and baggier sleeve. And I don't know how much bigger and baggier you'd really want than this. Also, it could be just a matter of knitting the armhole depth a pinch more shallow. And the way that she has you knit the armhole is that it kind of cuts off in, right? Oh no, so the armhole starts with this second contrasting stripe. So I wonder if it was just, I mean, a pinch more shallow. Would that pickup rate make more sense? Like I said, this is the one that actually has a little bit more of an issue with it. And you can just see where some of the stripes are kind of pinching in a little bit. Now, when I was blocking it, it wasn't particularly on my mind to remedy that. I sort of forgot about that at the time. So I'm sure that had it been on my mind while I was pinning for blocking, I could have maybe done something a little bit more to remedy that, but I didn't. So that was really the only thing that I found I had a little bit of an issue with. Otherwise, just thrilled overall. Like such a simple classic piece. I hope that my hyping up of this pattern doesn't make you feel like this is going to be anything revolutionary. It's quite the opposite. And I think that's why I've just loved it so much, because to find a sweater that just knits up so simply but is really lovely in the end, in the after effect, I think it looks pretty store-bought, honestly. And just the color blocking of the stripes, It's a little bit more special, and I'm so happy with it. When it came to blocking it, I did my typical, I blocked it the way I always block things, and I went to go pin things out, and I didn't really feel like I had to pin out anything except for the hem, which I gave a good stretch because I did not want any tapering. And in the sleeves where the nature spun was held single, I did just try to kind of tug on those stripes a little bit just to get the width to sort of match that of the fisherman's wool stripes. It's definitely not perfect, and I definitely don't care. Now, when this came off of the blocking mats, I think what I've noticed with the fisherman's wool in particular is that when this is freshly blocked, it has that sort of paperiness about it where it's like kind of very stiff. And I think you could probably tell in the after blocking photos. It's it reminds me of like a linen fabric where if you sort of just like pinch it, it will stay there. And I think what I've noticed with my corsavan cardigan that I knit in the same yarn is that after a few wears, it really does sort of warm up and everything starts moving a little bit more fluidly. Again, very much like a linen fabric is how it's behaving. But in the end, I got a beautiful amount of drape. So when it does sort of break in, yeah, it has to like break in a little bit. I think everything's just going to move really nicely. And to be honest, I was really excited to throw it on. It's a little warmer still today, but it's the perfect sort of just cozy throw on layer for a summer evening. So I'm so thrilled with it. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a breakdown of the price for this one, but because it was stash yarn and I didn't do the best job of weighing things before and after, I'm guesstimating these amounts a little bit. But just for reference, in case you're curious, so the pattern is the Stripe Hype Sweater by Veronica Lindbergh. As I had said, I bought the pattern myself, and it looks like that costs about $7.83. I already told you the different yarns that I had used, and the main color was the one that I had purchased in like a big pack on Amazon quite a while ago. And if you break it down, typically if you're going to purchase the Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool full price, it's somewhere around $14. Depends where you get it, if you got it on sale or not, but around $14 full price for the Fisherman's Wool. The pack that I got it in, I wound up paying around $7.97 per ball. Now, it's kind of hard to say because I was working with some leftovers and then tapped into another ball, but I do believe that in total, I wound up using about 2 skeins of the Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool, and they're very hefty skeins. So that might even be a little bit liberal in the guess, but something around there. So had I gone out and purchased those two at full price, the main color alone would be about $28. However, again, because I got those on sale, the main color comes to about $15.94. As far as the other yarns, I am not going to count the price of the Cascade 220 because that was truly a scrap. It was left over. I had just tapped into that ball for my dad's sweater earlier this year, so that was already accounted for in the price of that sweater. So at this point, it was free to me. However, if you are purchasing the Cascade 220 at full price, that's around $11.20 a ball, again, depending where you're getting it. And I had purchased it for about $9.20 a ball. Sorry, I meant $11.50 full price. So just in case you're curious, but again, I'm not going to factor in the price of that because it truly was a scrap. As far as the nature spun balls of yarn, I actually had all of those from a thrift haul a little while back, and I believe I paid $1 for each ball of yarn. Now, I will try and weigh the leftovers that I have and do a little bit of math to find out just how much I used. But I would say that if you are referencing my numbers in order to make your own, just do keep in mind that I was using this sport weight yarn and the green I did hold double. So obviously I will have used more of that than the others, but I really did not use much of the nature spun yarn. However, of course, if we're factoring that in, at $1 a ball because I tapped into each color, that would be $4 more. So based on those numbers, the total that I paid for the yarn in this sweater for this particular project was about $19.94. And then factoring in, of course, the price of the pattern, my full project total comes to about $27.77. And like I said, that's for a project that took a total of 31 days. I think that $30 is a pretty fair amount for this project and the amount of time that I put into enjoying it. And I definitely think I'm going to get my money's worth with that pattern because I absolutely plan to knit it up again. So if you guys have any other questions, if I missed anything, definitely let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to answer those for you. And otherwise, I just am so glad that you guys have enjoyed the process of knitting this stripe pipe alongside me. And we will definitely be talking about stripe pipes again in the future because I have about 50 variations on my mind. So for now, that is my finished object. We'll see if I can stay comfy in this for the remainder of the podcast. It's getting a little toasty in here, but I'm doing okay so far. So happy to be wearing it. Happy to be done with such a great, great project. Now, I always love to talk about my projects in the order of how long they've been on the needles. And I think I'm going to surprise you with the next one a little bit today. So let's chat about the current longest standing WIP, which is my sand cardigan by Maria Iseva of Ullin Knitwear. And this project I am knitting out of my absolute dream yarn, which is Nora Majora in the colorway 01 Sake. As of today, this project has been on the needles for 101 days. Woohoo! We should celebrate, right? Like they do in school, dress like you're 100 years old. Yeah, let's talk about this. My typical spiel week after week is that this is my soccer watching knitting, and it usually makes about 1 or 2 inches of progress. However, this week is a little bit different. I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see it, but we have last week's progress keeper right here on top of my finger, and I have made way more progress than usual. I will measure it because I'm curious myself. Wow. Okay. So I did about 9 inches of knitting on the body of this cardigan this week, which is particularly comical because I feel like your average sweater body is around like 12 inches after the underarm. So after 9 inches of knitting, you would think we're nearly there. But we're not because this is an ankle length cardigan. And so basically what's going on is that I have stayed true to my word that I will not be casting on anything new until either this or my messy dressy are complete. And with my stripe pipe having been off the needles now for a few days because it's been blocking, I hadn't had any other mindless knitting. And so this has actually been all over the place. Over the weekend, I took it with me to work. I always have a little knitting with me in case I get wherever I'm going early, and I did. So I was able to get some work done on this, and then it's been my mindless knitting since I am working on just the back and forth of the body right now. Last week I had asked if anyone was able to refer me to a video or just more advice for knitting a double knit button band without having to first go in and pick up all the stitches and then like integrating the double knit button band. And I had a few people let me know what they would do. And so when I get to that point, I'll be investigating those options. So thank you. But still, if you have a recommendation on the best way to knit a double knit button band while just integrating it as you go instead of having to pick up all of the stitches first, I'd love to know what your feelings are on that. So I think that in the next week, I'm probably still just going to be on the back and forth of this. However, if I get particularly bored, I'll go back to the sleeves because I do have to finish those as well. And I think we'll just be seeing a bit more progress on this. And ideally getting it done before the end of spring, as it was part of my spring knitting plans. So that'd be really cool. Honestly, what was fun about knitting on this week, I've so been enjoying having this as my reliable go-to soccer watching knitting. And it's been a fun ritual to have that link of it's time to watch our game and let me pull out my sand cardigan. But in doing so, I've really been practicing just knitting without looking. And that's been great too, because I was never able to purl without looking prior to this. So back and forth knitting, haven't been looking. So when I pulled this out this past week for more mindful, mindless knitting, I was looking at my knitting again, and it just got me sort of reinvigorated about this project because of all of the colors in this yarn. Similarly, almost to knitting up the stripe hype, that feeling of let me just get one more stripe in. I think that knitting up a yarn like this one with all of the variation in just colors, it's such an exciting yarn to knit. And because of the fiber makeup of this, it has silk in it and it's a very lightweight unspun wool. It's so frothy and light that it's a really great knit to have on the needles in this season and this weather. And I've just fallen back in love with with the knitting on this because every row I'm so eager to see like, but what will I get in the next row? What if I get a good color? Because the colors really do surprise you. I tried to get a close up of my current like favorite little splotch of the cardigan where it just so happened that all of these more sort of like pastel-y and watercolory colors, they all wound up in one spot and it's just really beautiful. But then it's also super exciting when you get a bigger chunk of color come through because some of the color bits really do show up in like these little uh, just droplets, little tufts of color that arrive while you're knitting on this. And those are so fun to find too. I love the way that those tufts feel in my hands. This yarn, the whole point of the Nora Madara is that it's this very like organic and imperfect yarn. And I find that to be just really beautiful. I love the thick and thin qualities of it. I love that there are parts that the gauge is just like out of whack because the yarn is so thick in those spots. And I love when those sections come up, the feeling of that actual like squishy fiber in my hand. It's just really satisfying. So I think it's good that I was not forced to, but the way that everything worked out, this has just been on the forefront a little bit more. And I'm glad that it is because as much as I've enjoyed the ritualistic knitting on it, I'm equally loving the appreciation that I get to have while I am seeing all the new colors and the different gauges and just everything show up. So as of trying this on earlier today, I am at the point now where like if I stand up, you can actually see from there how long it is, but we're at just about above the knee. So I mean, from my knee down to my ankle, if I did 9 inches of knitting on the body in this, we're very close to being done, I guess. Um, So that's really exciting because I'm so happy to have this. So that's where we're at here. We'll just have to see. I definitely have to do a little bit more thinking still, or maybe I should just be a little bit more aware when I'm out and about of what I'm going to wind up choosing to do with the pockets here, as they are intended to be knit in the fabric that you see on the rest of the cardigan. But after talking to you guys a little bit and just thinking about it myself, I am feeling like the pockets, I would prefer to knit them at a smaller gauge and with a less fragile fiber. So definitely it's something that's going to happen sooner than later. And yeah, I don't know. I really love this one. It's the dream. It's the dream. And now that we have a longer cardigan, whereas before this was so unmanageable because there were sleeves, but no body for a long time. And so it made the twisting and turning just very fussy. Now that things are longer, it's way easier to work on. So it is actually very easy to take out and about too. It just kind of sits in my lap like a little blanket and I can knit back and forth on it. No problem. Because you could sort of twist and turn the body without having the sleeves sort of flapping back and forth. And yeah, so I really don't have much to say because I just knit a whole bunch on it, but nothing exciting. Other than just I am happy to be playing with this yarn again. So that's the Sand Cardigan by Maria Aceva. Been on the needles for 101 days. Okay. I feel like I should have a little like wah, wah, wah sound effect right now, because if I'm being perfectly honest, this whip crushed my spirits a little bit this week. Kind of got to me. I'll get into it. Let me introduce the project. It is the Florence tank by Sari Nordland. It is also part of Stash Bust Spring. I am knitting this out of what we think is a cone of Color Mart Cashmerino. I had thrifted it. It's the colorway Verde Musco. And I have been working on this lace button-up vest tank project for 38 days. However, for about the past 6 days, it's been in time out because I'm angry at it. Let me start by showing you what is happening here. My progress keeper is here. And so I got about 3.5 inches done since last week, which was exactly what I needed to do to split for the arms, or not the sleeves, but just for the front and back of this vest. So it's knit bottom up all over lace. And I'm mad at it. So on the back, I have the stitches for the back on try-it-on tubing. I have the right side of the cardigan on try-it-on tubing as well. And then you'll see over here that this is the left front side, and I began the process of knitting up the sides of this, or the front of this vest, where everything is tapering until it meets in a more narrow sort of strap for the, for the straps. And I want to preface by saying I feel like there's been a lot of negativity around this knit. And really, it's no fault of the pattern. It's me and my inexperience in lace knitting and my newfound dislike of lace knitting. And the inexperience factored into the roadblock that I hit. So the button bands on this one is totally integrated. As you're knitting along, you are knitting the button band, which is really nice. I wish more patterns did that. I wonder why they don't. Maybe because they're usually top down, so it might just be easier to get it from the bottom up. But like, I wish that the sand cardigan had an integrated button band, because I don't think anyone wants to go back and knit that button band. So that's really nice. And then when you split for the underarm, so splitting for the front and back of this tank, the underarm is finished with an I-cord edge that's also integrated. So once this is done, it's done. How nice is that? And I think in typical lace knitting fashion, so you're decreasing, right? We have to decrease to get from the full body width of this into that nice tapered, skinnier strap. And in typical sort of charted lace fashion, it's done by decreasing, and you, the knitter, are responsible for maintaining the lace pattern as you go. Now, I have had difficulty reading my knitting in the lace pattern since the bottom of this. And I get multiple comments on every video, like, put in some stitch markers so that you could see where things line up. But the issue was that the way that this lace pattern works, it's a 10-row repeat, and it's made up of 2 5-row repeats that are sort of brick laid. And when I put my stitch markers in that's what I did, because that's what I do for cable knitting to separate the lace repeat. But because then the whole repeat shifts and it's a different repeat entirely when it does, the stitch markers made it way more confusing for me than they made it helpful. So we ditched those a while back. After that, what I've been doing and have found great success with is identifying the easiest sort of landmark in the repeat, which for me has been the yarn overs. Those are super easy for me to identify on my needle. And so I was able to just sort of count out loud the stitches and move along the row, knowing that when I hit the 5th stitch or whatever it is, that's the yarn over. And that kept me in check in pattern the whole time. So great. The issue then was that 2 things happened simultaneously in this decreasing front section that made it difficult, and I messed up. So first of all, you're decreasing, which means that you're never, you don't start just at the beginning of that chart every row, which has been my saving grace all along, knowing that I just start at the beginning of the chart and I count until I hit my yarn over, and that's what I follow from then on. 5th stitch yarn over. That moves along too. So it's always different every row. So now that I was decreasing, which you're decreasing on both sides and you've cast off stitches for the underarm, now it's like, figure out where the beginning of your row is. And I actually really impressed myself and was able to figure that out somehow. To keep the pattern in line, I was able to figure out, like, working backwards, mirroring this, looking at the front and the back and saying, okay, if that's my yarn over, then the next row has to line up in such a way that the yarn over lines up with this part. And I figured that part out, which I was pretty impressed with myself about. Where I went wrong, however, is that while you're decreasing and you're told to maintain the lace pattern, I feel like I made what is a very typical sort of rookie mistake of adding back stitches that I had been decreasing by doing a yarn over at the end of a lace repeat. Now, personally, I do feel like this is something that if there was just a note in the pattern that said, you're going to be decreasing, you're on your own to figure out how you're going to maintain the lace pattern while you're decreasing. But just so you know, if the point of the chart where you're at ends in a yarn over, like, don't do that. I think that could have solved a little issue. That's me personally. And it's probably way more obvious to someone who does a lot of lace knitting. But to someone who hasn't, I did yarn overs where I should not have. And I had done that probably at the beginnings of a row, but also at the end. So where I'm at right now is I was like rocking and rolling, so impressed with myself for being able to maintain the lace pattern while I go. How exciting, go me, I'm doing it. And I completed this step in the pattern and it says you should now have 26 stitches remaining. And I have like 45 stitches. So clearly I didn't do things right. The result now is that the front panel is way too wide. I mean, this is already supposed to be kind of up here. And so it should be half the size that it is, essentially. Now, also, I did this, I think the day I filmed last week, maybe the day after. So the podcast had not yet gone live, and I got multiple comments saying, before you split for the front and the back, put in a lifeline. So I had not yet done that. And I should have. I just was very excited, or I wasn't actually excited. I was nervous. So I was just like, okay, I have the time right now to sit down and do this. Let's just do it. And I did. And then I was like, I'm doing it. Look at me go. And then this progressed very quickly into, I did it, but I didn't do it properly. And so the most logical next step for me to not undo all of the hard work of the body is that I'm going to be unknitting all of this. I think I have a total of 24 rows in this front of the pattern, and it's not a ton of stitches. But to make sure that I don't drop stitches and wind up with just a bigger mess of a situation, I'm going to go through and unknit each individual row of those 24 rows. And so for that reason, it's been in timeout. I was telling myself, like, yeah, just wait till after you film the podcast so you could show them what you did. But realistically, I just have to work up the determination and I don't even know what to unknit 24 rows. Now, the good thing in doing that is what I discovered about halfway through was that where the slip stitches are for the I-cord edge, I knit the first few of them, I think, too tight. So the lace can't really open up in that section. So when I reknit it, I will be more careful like I was in the top part here to do that part more loosely. So that's good. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to fix that. Yeah. And so actually the real next move is going to be one of two things. Either it will be me unknitting this and redoing it, or it will be to pop in a lifeline on the right-hand side and try to do things correctly on the right-hand side. That way, maybe that'll give me a little confidence boost before just unknitting and trying again, kind of not knowing what's going on. But the good news is I believe I've figured out what I did wrong. It's fixable. It's just a matter of having to undo what I did. And so that is my word to the wise here today, that if you are doing any sort of decreasing in lace, or you have to stay in pattern, perhaps if you're more experienced, you could let us know. Is there ever a situation in which you are meant to do those yarn overs at the beginning and end of a pattern? Should you always exclude those? Because my personal thought process was that I better do that yarn over because it's part of the pattern and I wouldn't want to be decreasing where I'm not supposed to be. And so then to get to the end and realize the whole time I should have been decreasing essentially more than what you think you are. I mean, I don't even know. Is there a world in which you are supposed to do the yarn overs or not supposed to do the yarn overs? Is there a way that you could maybe know that ahead of time, or is it always just don't do the yarn overs? Because I'm not sure. So we will see. I'm upset with it right now and just felt like I could better direct my attention elsewhere. That's kind of why this hand cardigan got so much work this week, because after the few hours I spent doing the front, I just couldn't bring myself to look at this. I'm still having a hard time. So I will do my best to take one course of action between now and next time I film. But if I don't, I'm sure you will understand. So that's kind of the unfortunate thing that is the Florence tank at the moment. So sad. And the final little whip update I have for you today is my messy dressy, which is my own little creation I've got going on that I am crocheting for a soccer game I'm going to be going to with to see Argentina play. And I have decided to create a Argentina crochet dress. And basically, I wanted to get an idea of exactly how many of my granny squares I'm going to need by just being able to map them out first. So I wanted to test out how I was going to secure the granny squares together. My design of this is loosely based off of a skirt that I had crocheted where it was all one color, and I single crocheted all of the granny squares together for that in order to create the long panels of granny squares that I had. And so with this variation, I wanted to try out a couple of things. To make things easier on myself, I really wanted to sew the squares together on the sewing machine with a zigzag stitch. And I tried that earlier today. However, I think the fabric was too thick for the sewing machine. I believe that the resolution to this issue is a walking presser foot. So I ordered one of those to see if that will get the job done, just to help move the fabric underneath the presser foot of the sewing machine. So I tried the zigzag stitch and I wasn't particularly bothered by the way that it would look if it was done more neatly, if it was more smoothly running underneath the sewing machine, but I wound up cutting it out because it was a mess. So for the time being, I wanted to try out single crocheting the squares together. And the immediate issue that I kind of ran into was, of course, that these squares are two different colors. And so whichever color I wind up using to actually seam them together will look sloppy on the other square. And so I don't know how I feel about it. Also, doing the single crochet, so I use the blue, but doing the single crochet creates an even more sturdy fabric that I don't need. I would rather it be more drapey. So that's just something to bear in mind. What I wound up doing was with the blue, single crocheting the blue to the white squares. And then I used the blue to single crochet blue to blue, and then the white to single crochet white to white. I would very much like to just zigzag stitch this together. However, if I had to single crochet, I don't think it's the worst. And I probably would use the blue to do the single crochets down the seams where those colors are next to each other. I feel like I was going to say something else about it, but I've just been making some more squares still. And when I figure out how I'm assembling them, I can create just like a loose idea of the bodice and then determine more so how many squares I'm really going to need. So for now, I'm just a square making machine. So yeah, little bit of just experimentation was done here and more squares were made, but still nothing really to show for it. And so this is what I have for you today. So you'll have to imagine just another row of the white and then the blue and all that. I will say that the one thing you get with the single crochet that you don't with the zigzag stitch is it's reducing the size of the squares when you do the single crochet because it's sort of eating a little bit of the seam. Whereas when I do the zigzag stitch, the full width of the square is just going to be what it is because I'm just going to butt them up against each other and zigzag across. So that would be helpful to lose a little bit of the width because I do think that my squares are just like a pinch bigger than I would like them to be. However, it really doesn't matter because I'm just going to make this up as I go. So that's just what's going on with this at the moment. It has not been forgotten about. It's just at an awkward point where really it's like it means nothing. There are just squares. So that's where we're at. Hopefully by next week, I will have gotten that walking foot, presser foot. And hopefully that's the answer to my problems. However, if you know better than I do, definitely let me know in the comments. Because if the walking foot doesn't work, I'd love to know what you would use to sew together granny squares. Thank you. Ay. So that is what I have for you today. Genuinely, the Florence tank threw me off this week, and I think you could probably tell just in my spirit, it broke me a little bit. Just when you work so hard on something and it doesn't go according to plan when you really thought you were on track. So I hate to end this on like such a gloomy note, but that really is all I have. I'm sticking with my plans of the messy dressy has to be done in about a month. And other than that, I would like to not cast anything on until either the Santa cardigan or the messy dressy are complete. So based on what I've got right now, it seems like it's going to be a little bit till we have a new cast on. And it's a shame because I have so many exciting things I want to cast on. But that's just what it is. Quick question for you. I posted about this on Instagram, but have a wider audience here. So just thought I would ask really quick if any of you own this book. It's called Hot Knits 30 Cool Fun Designs to Knit and Wear by Melissa Leapman. If you own this book, would you mind either emailing me, my email's in the description, or sending me a message if you could let me know the size ranges for those patterns. There's one in particular that I'm eyeing. So if you own it and wouldn't mind helping me out with this a little bit, there's a pattern that I came across that's in that book that I would love to knit. And just, it doesn't have any sizing info online. So I don't know if it goes pattern by pattern or what, but maybe if you own it, you could just help me out before I go ahead and purchase the book. I did find a used copy online, so I will just wind up purchasing it if no one owns it. To see if the size range would work for me, as a lot of earlier publication books don't usually have a great upper end of the size range. So I just thought maybe I would take a chance and see if anyone has it. If you could get in touch with me and maybe just let me know what the size ranges are like for that book. And then I'll know if I can knit one of the patterns in it. So there you go. Quick call to action. Anyway, I do think that that's all I have for you guys this week. I hope that you're enjoying the beautiful weather. Hopefully it's as nice by you as it is by me. And I think that that's exactly how I'll spend the next couple hours. I think I'm going to go knit on the sand cardigan and bring my squares outside and just go back and forth between the two of those. So that's all I got for you. I just feel like I'm forgetting something, but I'm not. I'm just trying not to end on such a gloomy note. I apologize. Anyway, all that being said, if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoy knitting content in general, I would so appreciate it if you would go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. If you subscribe and you ring the bell, then you will be notified anytime I post a video. However, I do post a podcast style of video just like this one every Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And with that, a very big ol' thanks for watching. And I'll catch you on the next one. All right, you guys. Bye.